As you've heard, Danuta Buzdygan is our guest this evening. She was born in Poland shortly before the outbreak of World War II and lived through the occupation of her homeland, deportation to Germany, and finally, with her family, moved to the United States after the war, where she studied medicine and became a pediatrician. Hers is an inspiring story of not only survival, but of finding meaning and purpose in the midst of major upheaval in society that impacted her life in so many dramatic ways. It's a privilege to be with her this evening as she shares her story with us. She is currently writing her memoir as a way of preserving a history that, with the passing of time, is also passing away. Welcome. I just mentioned your memoir, something it seems to me that ties in with efforts all around the world to encourage people who lived through World War II to write down their memories of that time, thus preserving them and passing them on for future generations. What is it that inspired you or motivated you to write this memoir now?
Well, just that. I was urged many people to do this. Specifically, 4 years ago, my daughter-in-law's parents participated in the Warsaw Uprising, and her father was invited to speak at the anniversary of the uprising 4 years ago. And I went with my daughter-in-law and him, and there were people from Polish TV and press, and I mentioned that I was in Warsaw during the uprising, and they said, we should write about it. At that time I didn't think too much. I said, so many people lived through the war, it was so special. But then the Senior Research Center, it's center now, had a memoir writing group, and I decided to join just to try it out. So we've been together now for 4 years, and my colleagues, some of them are here, encouraged me to speak about it, to publish it, people should know about it. So, okay, here I am.
Yeah. And having read the first draft, I'm looking forward to reading more as it gets edited, as you move along with it. It's a very inspiring story. So thank you for sharing your perspective, which is so helpful. I mean, many of us know the stories of World War II, but we know it from a textbook or some basic history. So it's so powerful to hear your story and to hear someone who actually lived through such upheaval in the world and has come through beautifully and has served humanity wonderfully. You start your memoir with the events that totally changed your childhood in August 1939. We've shared copies of the map that you shared with me to help me understand what transpired then. So I'm going to ask everyone who is here to have your map handy as Danuta shares with us what happened in that August of 1939 that totally changed your childhood.
My mother, my sister, then 2.5, and myself, we were vacationing in a resort town, Truskawiec, in southeastern part of Poland. And that map is all the way down to the left, and on the bottom, I think I just marked it with a little dot. So when, on 15th of August, my father came to visit us just for a day, and when we said goodbye to him at the train station, we didn't know we're not going to see him for the next 5.5 years. So then, September 1st, the war broke out, and we were still in Truskawiec. My grandmother, who was, she was a hotel manager in Truskawiec, So when people start dispersing to get back home, she returned to her apartment in Lvov, that's marked on the map. And we moved to my aunt's house, which was close to Truskavec. The place name was Drohobych. Now, Drohobych had a lot of refineries, and when it was bombed, the Drohobych was all on fire. And my mother decided that we would be better off getting to Lvov, to my grandmother. And so she contacted, my father was an officer in the Polish army, so she contacted the military command and asked if we could be transported to Lvov. And we were. And my grandmother said, "Why'd you come here? We're being bombed every day." Well, what we didn't know at the time, on the 17th of September, Soviet army entered Lvov because Germany and Russia signed a secret pact that summer of '39, and so now the Germans came from the west and the Soviets came from the east, and we were kind of trapped in Lvov and couldn't get back to Warsaw. My father was taken prisoner of war because he was in defense of Warsaw, and he was in prisoner of war camp in Germany from then on. So we were in Lvov. We were basically under Russian occupation at the time. And so when schools opened in November, I went to Sacré-Cœur school, normally run by nuns, but they were not at the time, just civilian teachers. And some changes in curriculum were made at the time. It was really kind of bad, and we were taught Pism pro Lenina, Stalina, Integracja now, which is the anthem, which I could still sing, but I won't. And so this was November. In January of 1940, all the residents in Lvov had to get new IDs. And when my mother applied, she was denied. For whatever reason, was it because she was officer's wife, whatever, I don't know. And then my uncles were arrested in March, and my grandmother's neighbor tipped my mother that the transport to Siberia is being readied, and we were on the list. And she suggested we stay with them, which we did. And so that night we did hear the soldiers marching upstairs to my grandmother's apartment. Finding nobody there, they just padlocked the apartment and left. Fortunately for us, they did not check the building. So the next morning, this lady's sister took my sister, Chris, and I went with my mother. We went by separate routes to my mother's brother's house, which was a different part of Lvov. And he wasn't too happy to see us because we were basic fugitives at that point. And my mother was coaching my sister. If somebody asks your name, say Jabłoński. If somebody tells you about your dad, say he was dead. And she said, she cried, no, my dad is not dead. Well, it was pretty obvious that we couldn't stay with my uncle, but by that time, the border between the Russian-occupied zone and the German-occupied zone was open, and so we were able to get back to Warsaw. So it was spring of 1940. Our apartment in Warsaw was occupied by a different family, but when we learned that we returned, they vacated the apartment. We were able to move back in, and basically the apartment was intact. It was just like we left it in summer. So I was able to return to my old school, and even though it was end of the school year, just about the end of the school year, I was still promoted to the next grade, except with the failing in German, which was by then compulsory. So later on, I transferred to a private school run by, there were three sisters, Goldman. Anna was the superior, and the third sister, Halina and Anna, were teaching them. Before the war, they just ran grammar school, but during the war, because there were no high schools and there were no universities, only vocational schools, they extended so they had a grammar school and also some vocational classes, so they could admit all their children. So now we were under German occupation, and with my father away and my sister 6 years younger, and I felt like I needed to be my mother's helper, so I felt pretty powerful. And because my sister was only, 2 years old then. So the life under occupation was pretty rough because food was rationed, there were curfews, there were arrests, there were deportations to the prisons, to concentration camps. Later on, when Germany declared war against the Soviets, there were air raids, and of course we had routine. We had to be dressed and go down to a cellar pretty quickly. And on 13th of May, 1943, a bomb was dropped on our building, and it fell in the middle of the courtyard. There was a lawn there, so the ground was soft, and the bomb exploded. And I remember distinctly how the walls swayed back and forth and came to standing. Fortunately, all the doors and windows were blown out throughout the building, but nobody was hurt. Everybody survived. So, in gratitude, the residents enacted a statue of Blessed Virgin at the end of the courtyard. So this was 43. As I mentioned, things were pretty tough for us because we had no income other than under Geneva Convention. My father, as the officer, was entitled to some compensation, which he sent home, but that was not enough. So little by little, my mother first sold the parcel that they had outside of Warsaw, and then personal belongings, the linens and the silverware, and plus she took little jobs that we could do at home, like putting soup cubes in paper covers and attaching metal tips to shoelaces. We did this at home. Eventually, she rented part of the apartment. It was to a furrier and his wife. And for whatever reason, I don't know, but it sort of came in handy later on. He made a fur coat for me and for my sister, which we ended up having it after we were evacuated. So in the summer of 1944, our neighbors who had a daughter my sister's age were spending vacation in Świdra outside of Warsaw, and they invited Chris to stay with them. My mother and I visited them, and then we returned to Warsaw. They returned also at the end of July, and on August 1st, I was in front of our building about to cross the street to go to a deli, and I heard shots ring out. And as I backed off, and that continued, so I went to the apartment, and my mother, my sister, and I came down to cellar, and other residents were already there. what I learned. So it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was coded as hour W, which meant beginning of the Warsaw Uprising. So we were in the cellar, and I remember a church was within walking distance from our building, and the priest was coming to distribute for Holy Communion. And I remember women tearing up sheets rolling up into bandages. I don't remember the exact date, but there was a commotion, and a German soldier came in and ordered everybody out. We were not able to go to the apartment, do anything, just whatever we had at hand, we had to get out in the street and join a throng of people, the other residents already marching down. And the escorts, the soldiers who escorted us were not Germans. They happened to be Russian and Ukrainians who deserted Russia because there was a war between Germany and Russia, and they joined Germans. So Germans gave them a free rein, and they were brutal. They were raping and tearing the gold chains from necks and taking the rings and so on. I saved my mother wedding band by wearing on my toe. So as we were marched down the avenue, could see the burning houses and old people abandoned. They're the people who couldn't march. They were just left there. And it was a very sad sight. So we ended up at a very large open farmers market, and there were already thousands of people there. And again, there were a lot of atrocities happening there. Fortunately, we didn't have to stay there very long. We were taken by suburban train to Pruszków, which was a railroad depot, was changed into a transit camp. And we stayed there, and there was a man delivering bread in a small wagon, and he offered to smuggle us outside, but it was supposed to be one by one. And I was going to be first, but my mother said, no, take Tom first. Now, Tom was a classmate of mine who was a scout, was in the uprising as a courier. So he went first, and then we got the message that he was fed and rested, and our turn never came. A few days later, we were just loaded on boxcars and taken to Germany. Yeah. And that night, our first stop was Berlin. And my sister remembered, we were allowed to get off the train, and my sister remembered those air raid, and we were taken to shelter. I didn't remember that. I do remember, however, the next morning we were marched to turn out to be Oranienburg, Sachsenhausen concentration camp. And we were in a big plaza there, and the men were separated, and they were to remain there. The single women were in a different group, and they were taken to Ravensbrück, the women's concentration camp. And women with children, which was us, and also my aunt and my cousin, we were tracked to Bergen-Belsen, another concentration camp. And I remember as we entered the camp, I saw barracks, and what seemed strange to me was that there were clotheslines and pillows and quilts hanging those clotheslines. And I later learned that this was where Jewish families from Holland lived. And in fact, years before that. Anne Frank was there too before she was taken to Auschwitz. Now we were taken to the other end of the camp, where there were huge cans, and we were to stay. There was nothing in the can but the straw, but we were to stay there. And the Jewish men brought and distributed. So we were given cans, and then they distributed soup into those cans. We at the end where the tents were, there were latrines and troughs with running water, and of course the towers, the watchtowers. But we didn't stay there too long, probably a little longer than a week. And then we were transported again, this time to a very large transit camp when the town's name was Lehrte, where there were a lot of different nationalities. And then we went through quarantine. The women's hair was cut. Somehow my mother's was preserved. And there were showers, and then there were photographs taken, and badges distributed. Those badges identified different by color and design, and identified different nationalities. And the loudspeaker would announce, what groups by these badges, by what colors and so on, were ready to be transported on. So again, when our group was co-internat, and we were just a small group, 50 women and children, and we went to a place called Limenau, and we were there for a week, and then we went to Main-Kingsburg, and there we were supposed to stay in a building that was previously occupied by the Russian prisoners, and it was infested with bed bugs, so it had to be disinfected before we could move in. We moved there, and women and older children were taken to the local farms to gather potatoes, because by that time it was September. And we stayed there about 2 months. And I believe that this was where my father, because he didn't know what happened to us after we were taken out of Warsaw, and of course we didn't know where he was at the time, and in order to correspond with him, we had to have special forms. He sent us letters with the form that was a reply. We didn't have that. So, but he found us through International Red Cross. And so we established contact with him at that point. So from Main-Kingsburg, we were taken to, I think that was probably the last stop before Beckershagen. That was a town on the Weser River. And by that time, we were assigned to the forestry department. And there was a barrack being built for us on the other side of the river in Hammond, up the mountain and down from the forester's house. And by that time was November, and we moved to this new barrack, and so it was a large room with bunk beds. With cabinets at the end, and there were 3 other rooms. One was a bathroom, one was a kitchen, and the third one was supposed to be private quarter for the German lady who was our guardian, so she lived there. There was no running water, so there was an outhouse built outside the barrack. So women were supposed to work in the forest. So in the fall, they gathered underbrush and burned it in bonfires. And there were two German gentlemen, probably spared from being at the front line because one of them was limping and walked with a cane. And the other one, we nicknamed Cockroach because he had a pointy mustache. And Karalu was mean, threatening actually, and the other guy was benign. So the women that was winter time. Women had to work there, and in the spring, the women and older children were to plant new trees. And in April 8th, this is 45 now, we heard shots, and there was a front line, and Americans were coming near. Of course, we didn't know, but the forester ordered us to come to his house, and we were there in the basement, and then the American soldiers came in, and there were two girls in our group who spoke English, and they explained that we're Polish women and children. Their lieutenant was of Polish descent, Lieutenant Buzdygan, I remember. But it was a front line, so they had to move on. But he let the other American, whoever, let know about us. So when we were able to return to the barrack, the Americans provided us with the food, and there was no more cockroach. And
they were gone.
There was essentially we were liberated. So this was the 8th of April, and on the 15th of April, a messenger came with a note from my father, telling us to come and join him in Dessau when he was in the prisoners' camp, which happened to be not that far away from where we were. And so we set off on foot. So his Oflag, his prisoners' camp, was liberated by Americans on the 1st of April. So his was on the 1st. Ours, we were liberated on the 8th. And by the 15th, we were with him. First family out of some 2,000 prisoner of war, first family that reunited. So it was very, very happy, happy time. My sister, who was 2, last time she saw him, she didn't recognize him. She knew him from photographs, but she saw it took her a while to warm up. Of course. But so the Americans, there was an estate in the vicinity. The Americans took care of the manor and made room for us to live there. And the liberated officers lived in surrounding towns. But they would come, the name of the place was Ripen, they would come there. Some of them were teachers, so they started classes for younger children, because by that time there were more people coming in. And there was one officer who put together a folk dancing group. So there were 4 couples. There were 4 girls. I was one of them. There were two Christines that were with us. The girls who I mentioned spoke English, and another girl, and the 4 of the younger officers. And also in the Oflag, they had an orchestra. So that orchestra and our dancing group gave performances in the surrounding towns with the Polish community. So by next year, by 46, there was a Polish educational center established in Lippstadt in Westphalen, and the teachers from, I did mention that when we were still in Riepen, repatriation began, and some people decided to go back to Poland, including my mother and my cousin, because my uncle, who was in Oranienburg, Sachsenhausen, who was liberated by the Russians, returned to Warsaw, and so my aunt and my cousin returned to Warsaw. But my father was interesting because while he was prisoner of war, I think his idea was when the war ended, we returned to Poland. And my mother said, no way. This is not free Poland. This is communist, regime, Russian occupation. I lived there, and no, I'm not going back. So we didn't go back. So we remained in Germany, and so in the Polish Educational Center, my sister was in grammar school. By that time, I only needed 1 year to finish what was gymnasium, high school, and then in 49 I enrolled at University of Cologne. And my dad taught in that school. So when they decided on immigration, we didn't know where we would go because it really didn't matter. The possibilities were Canada, Australia, or United States. United States and Canada required sponsors. I don't know about Australia. So the Polish National Alliance in Chicago was very active in recruiting sponsors. And so one day my parents received a letter from a Polish lady, of course American lady in Chicago by the name of Kosinski, and she said that she signed papers for me. And my father replied that, thank you, but we were separated 5.5 years and we're not going to be separated again. So by that time she decided to, the reason I think that she only signed for me because she took the sponsorship very seriously. Sponsors were required or expected to assure the job and living quarters and all this. So I think initially she thought she could only accommodate one person. But so after she decided to sign papers for my parents, turned out that somebody else did that already. And that created problems, as we found out after a while, that it was a filing problem, and my papers were under D. That's my first initial, and my parents, my sister's papers were under B, our last name. And once that was clarified, we were ready to emigrate. So by that time was the end of 1949, and we arrived in New York in 1950, February of 1950.
Wow, that's quite a journey that you've taken us through in this time. And there's so much in there that I know has resonated or stirred things up inside me that I'm curious about. And if you have some water, give you after that wonderful recounting of a story. As you were speaking to us about what you experienced, one of the things that I seemed to hear quite a bit was education. There seemed to be no matter what was going on in the world, no matter how terrible the occupation was, all the disruptions, it seemed that somehow a way was found to form schools, to educate the young. How did that impact for you? I mean, in that situation, was it something that helped to get through things, knowing that you had studies and the school and classmates?
Yes, that definitely. So I didn't mention at Goldman School, there was they pretty much stuck to the pre-war curriculum, but a lot of subjects were forbidden.
Right.
So we took notes. We had textbooks at home. Mm-hmm. We took notes on paper scraps, and we had arts and crafts in case there was an inspection. That's what we were busy doing. So the three Goldman schools sisters were really devoted to education and very patriotic too. And after the war, Anna Goldman was received a recognition and was received a medal. Mm-hmm. And the building where she lived, which was in my neighborhood, there's still plaque on the door and with her name, and so. Yeah. So that was, the education during the war. So last year, before the uprising, I would have to begin that in that fall. I would be quote unquote vocational school, and needed to have apprenticeship somewhere. Mm-hmm. So our friends arranged for me to have a certificate for bookbinder, because that was fake. It wouldn't happen, but I picked it up. It was just before the uprising. And then later when we were in the camp, those two older teenagers, girls, both names Christines, they organized reading and writing classes for the two youngest kids, my sister and another little girl. And then, as I mentioned, after liberation, that originally those officers set up classes, and then Americans took over school building, and there was more regular classes, plus the educational center eventually in 46. Mm-hmm. There was a full curriculum.
Sure. Yeah. I found it interesting what you said, that the sisters, how they maintained secretly a Polish heritage and were able to it shows a sure way that even in the midst of all of this, there was that love that they had and were able to continue, which is an important thing, I believe, in any kind of situation where you're trying to get through. Something else you mentioned, and I think is important, is about the priest coming to give communion. But what part did your faith and your church affiliations, what part did that play in helping you through all of this major disruptions?
For me, very, very important. Very important. Until this day. Now, when we returned to Warsaw, my class was getting ready for First Communion, and I wanted to have, to do it. And my mother said, "No, wait until your dad comes back." Well, we didn't know it would take 5 years.
5 years.
But eventually she relented. But by the time it was a day for First Communion, I was sick, so I had to have another day. But that was important. It was important. That was the only thing. We didn't know, we lived from day to day, we had no idea what's going to happen the next day.
Sure.
And that was the hope, you know. It was very, very important.
I love the story you shared about the priest, even in the midst of all that bombing, coming there and giving communion to the people. What a way to fortify them as you know this explosion is going on.
Yeah.
And the story about the gratitude and thankfulness of the people after that bombing is another testimony to how people can pull through and
at one time I still had family in Poland, and my uncle sent me a page from the newspaper, and then had a picture of the courtyard with the statue, and the title was the miracle on Słupecka 4. It's the name of the street.
Yeah.
And then when I was in Poland, subsequently, the building survived the uprising, and the building's still there, and the statue is still there.
That's great testimony.
Yeah.
I like that. Through all of this, as you were sharing, I have to admit I am amazed. But there has to be something within you that enabled you to sense the need of your mom for a helper, to work with your sister, something within you that enabled you, as all of this is going on, this disruption, you're a week here, then a week there, you don't know where you're going when you get on this boxcar on a railroad. What would you say was within you that enabled you to persevere and make those decisions and move forward for you, and it sounds like for your family as well often?
I think I had a lot of confidence in myself, for one thing.
Okay.
And I felt responsible. My mother was pretty strong and didn't really have to depend on me, but I felt that I needed to, for some reason, to support her. And of course, my sister being that much younger than I am, it was up to me when mother was away. Mm-hmm. For some reason, I had to take care of her. I really just have to be responsible.
That says a lot for you and for your sense of self and responsibility to others. I think that's a great testimony, which is also a lesson for all of us in difficult situations, to be able to pull that out of ourselves, to, as you did all those many times, to do that. I know we're nearing the time, but there's one other thing I did want to ask you. When you got to the United States and you were in Chicago, you were able to pursue your medical degree and become a pediatrician. Was that something you had always thought about doing? And was this like the fulfillment of a long-term dream?
Not specialty, but medicine, yes. That came when I was still pretty young. Mm-hmm. I think I read the book, The Microbe Hunters, about Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, about their discoveries and so on. So I had an interest in it. Mm-hmm. And that continued. That's a good thing that I was able to get back to medical school. But no, the specialty came later. In fact, it took a long time before I decided, because the ear, nose, and throat chief offered me residency and, of course, pediatrics. And I was interested in different phases of it. And what finally made a difference was at the very end of my internship, we had a clinic, and I was assigned one room, and my colleague had another room. And my patient was a young policeman, and he was not too happy to see me. So I traded with Dan, my colleague, and his patient was a lady that must have been about 300 pounds or more, and I had to be on the stool. It was so frustrating. I didn't feel anything. I just couldn't examine her. And I walked out of there as I have total frustration, and the chief of pediatrics was walking by and said, "Did you make up your mind?" I said, "Yes." So he said, "Well, go and see my secretary."
It's amazing what could happen to make us make a decision and go one way or the other. Yeah. One other thing, I'll let you take some water while I bring this up. As you were sharing, you talked oftentimes about your mom, your sister, aunts, uncles, family, other people. I'm wondering, in that situation in which there was such disruption and constant movement to unknown locations and situations, did family and community help you get through all that?
Well, I think initially the family, because when I mentioned the Russian occupation, they were able to send us food packages, and we weren't able to visit them, but they were able to. And after the war broke out between, Germany and that was no longer possible. And then we didn't really see him or have contact with them until much later, because even after the war, there was no contact with people in Poland because I was under a communist regime, and a contact with the West was looked suspicious. So it was really dangerous for them to communicate with us, or for us to communicate with them. In fact, the first time I went back to Poland was 1960, and I went with a group of physicians. It was sort of a semi-official official visit, so I was able to see my family. And my aunt was able to come to my wedding, but there wasn't much contact. So I had this one aunt in Warsaw, an uncle with a cousin. So we were close, but that was the only family we had there. Mm-hmm. And as I said, after the war, they returned to Poland. It so happens that even if he was 3 years younger, we never had an opportunity to talk. We were kids. He turned out to be a physician too.
Oh, okay. So it's a family thing.
Yeah.
How cute. Yeah. So as we are approaching our end, one of the things I always like to ask people who share such powerful stories of inspiration with us, as you know, we are living in a time of great social upheaval. There's a lot going on within our own country and around the world. Often days, many of us feel out of sorts, confused, it seems chaotic. Is there some words of wisdom, something you could share with us in these troubling times to inspire us to stand and move forward?
We often say that history teaches, and who doesn't learn from history doesn't learn. But it's not always true. Maybe that what's happening now, some people that are responsible for some of the decisions don't know the history.
They don't know history. Yeah.
But the history, in a sense, it repeats itself, like what's going on right now with what's happening with the roundups, in the streets and so. That's like Warsaw under occupation. Yeah. That history somehow, who learned? Yeah, and what was learned?
Yeah, what was learned? Yeah.
So.
Well, hopefully, like you and so many others, we learn how to stand up for what is right, and to be a part of moving forward with the right as we work together. So, thank you, and I've enjoyed this, but now I would like to give you an opportunity. We have a few minutes left. If there are some questions from those of you here, certainly.
Thank you for your talk. During the time you were in Poland, didn't you see many Jews being captured and put into trucks? How did
Yes,
that affect
I
you?
did mention when we returned to Warsaw in 1940, the Jews were still seen in the street with, with the armbands with the Star of David. But by 41, they were all in the ghetto, in Warsaw Ghetto. And I do remember 43, there was an uprising in the ghetto, and the ghetto was on fire. I remember seeing that from my street. And I was aware of what was happening with the Jewish people at the time. In fact, our neighbor's son, two policemen came and told him he was 11 years old, told him to drop his pants, and inspected him, and left. They were satisfied, they determined he was. And one time, the superintendent in our building, who knew my sister from when she was born, he told my sister, Mrs. Buzdygan, watch out for Chris, because there were two women walking by, and I heard him pointed out to Chris, this may be a Jewish kid, so watch out for her. So this thing was happening, and we were aware of this. Of course, a lot of concentration camps. There were, of course, like Auschwitz. We know mostly that Jewish people, but there were Christian, there were Polish people. A lot of people who were arrested, and mostly, for instance, we had two priests who were friends, and they survived Dachau. But for some reason, Dachau had some 1,000 of Polish priests in Dachau concentration camp, because the Germans, it was not just regular population, but they were also after priests or like university professors and so on. They were arrested and sent to concentration camp too. That's how it was.
When you went back to Poland or Germany, did you have a sense of PTSD or anything? Because my father was also in prison. We are Hungarians, but went through similar things. And my father never went back to Hungary. And we got reparations, and when I first started going back, I would get the creeps, as we say in American English. And my father always said, he also said in Polish and Russian, it's not all Polish people who betray you, but it's always a Polish person, meaning a neighbor. So my father was betrayed by a neighbor and sent to prison, and all those people survived, and we're still living there. So my father, I guess my question to you is, when you went back, did you ever feel scared or strange that some of those people that may have betrayed you and your family were still thriving?
When I went back in 1960, I was scared because we had to surrender passports. And even though I stayed with my aunt, I visited friends in Poznań, another city. And the superintendent asked my aunt about me, where I was, so they were tracking, and I never felt more relieved when I got on the plane flying out of Warsaw. Yeah. So.
Just so you know, I have in-laws who live in Auschwitz. So what you said when we first went there to visit them, as Americans, although I wasn't born here, we are so well educated and we think we know so many things. And when we first went to Auschwitz to visit our in-laws, what you said earlier about people from different communities being first taken to Auschwitz, for us it was a Hungarian pilgrimage, because most Hungarians ended up at Auschwitz. But when they were giving us a tour, everybody looked the same in the photographs, because everybody's head was shaved, and they were more or less Caucasian. And we didn't know hundreds of people lined up who were priests and teachers and peasants, and then later came the Jews mostly. So for us it was like a triple shock. And the tours were kind of, have you ever been back to any of those camps, any of your camps? The tours were kind of surreal. That when you saw these things, like we had coffee at the Auschwitz Cafe.
Oh, we didn't take a tour, but several times later on when I went back to Poland, it was mostly visiting friends and so on, and family, when I still had family there. I was not interested in visiting Auschwitz. But then in 2005, I was there with my sister and my brother-in-law, and she wanted him to see the places where we were, even though we were not in Auschwitz, but we visited Auschwitz with the family. And then we went to Rheinburg, Sachsenhausen, and Bergen-Belsen. And Rheinburg, Sachsenhausen, because it was liberated by the Russians, everything was preserved. So in 2005, everything was still there. Like it is actually in Auschwitz, things are preserved too. And but Bergen-Belsen, and I just saw in the Nuremberg, the movie on Sunday, then they show Bergen-Belsen too. Bergen-Belsen was liberated by the British, and by that time there was a lot of illness, typhoid and so on. So whoever was surviving was evacuated, and the place was burned down. It's not a national park, so there are some mass graves there, and there's one little building, which is House of Prayer or something like this, and that's all that remains of Bergen-Belsen.
Well,
I just wanted to say, my mom has, she was born in Poland, and she had a similar, passageway over to West Germany and to get sponsorship here in the United States. But the Russians coming into their farms and burning the livestock whole, and escaping rape, and my grandmother not escaping that, and much of what you said is ringing
Very much.
bells with my mom.
So you speak Polish?
I was actually born, Poland was German then. So I was born in Germany. After the war, Eisenhower gave our section to Poland. So I speak German.
Oh, yeah, so the maps show the different sections, yes. So the part of Poland that was under occupation was General Gouvernement. The western part of Poland was annexed to Germany, and the western part it's now Ukraine, but was taken, it was under
I was
Russia.
young, so my geography is not so good.
Yeah.
But my memory is excellent. And I was young, I was 7 years old. So, and I came over in January 24th, 1950, just a month before.
oh
you.
yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we were on the same ship.
But I have to say that I'm concerned about America, the military on the streets. This is like almost reliving. And we gotta get smart.
Let's hope we do.
That's right.
Thank you.
I agree.
Thank you for sharing that.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
We have one more question.
Oh, We have 2 more questions.
Hi, thank you for sharing. My parents also had a very similar experience, but it took them many, many years to be able to talk about it freely. Did that also happen to you? Not being able to express your experiences to the people in Chicago when you first came, or your children if you have any?
We really didn't talk about it that much. I mean, in Chicago, it's big Polish population and so on, and so we were more involved with people there. No, not really. In fact, I had an interview last month with the Holocaust Museum on Long Island, and videotaped, and I have a copy of this videotape. My sons looked at it, and the remark was, "We didn't know a lot of details about your past." Well, we didn't talk about it. We just didn't talk about it.
Until they were fully retired and already in their 70s, when little bits and pieces started to trickle out. But as children, we knew nothing about it.
Yeah, so my sister's son at one time asked her, he said, he was asked about our past, so she wrote just a few pages. She didn't want to share with me because she thought that I would be correcting her, because her memories would be somewhat different because she was so much younger. But as I said before, I didn't think too much about writing the memoir, but now that even my kids say that they're learning something, I thought, oh, maybe it's worthwhile.
Yes, I'd just like to say thank you very much for sharing all of this. My mother was also in the Warsaw Uprising. In 1939, when the Germans were bombing Warsaw, she was actually shot in the leg. She almost had it amputated, but luckily they were able to save her. She joined the Armia Krajowa, the resistance army, and she served in that until the actual uprising itself. She was one of the women combatants that were marched off. There were 7,000 women that participated in the Warsaw Uprising. They were granted the status of soldiers, because originally Hitler wanted to shoot them all. But because of the Allies, it was basically, Hitler was told that if they shot all the Polish Armia Krajowa, they would take it out on German prisoners of war. So thankfully, and I really mean this, many, many, many Polish members of the Armia Krajowa survived, but my mom was marched off with the Polish women to a prisoner of war camp called Oberlangen in Germany. And I think one of the lovely things is they were all actually liberated. General Maczek's army, there was a massive Polish contingent that fought with the Allies, through D-Day and all the way through to invading Germany. And Maczek's forces were basically heading into northern Germany. And a group of Polish soldiers discovered, and they heard rumors that there was a prisoner of war camp full of Polish women. So very quickly, they literally all jumped in jeeps, and I think they took a tank, and they literally found the location. And Oberlangen was actually freed by Polish soldiers, So it was an incredible story. I mean, my mom still has a book where a lot of the soldiers signed and everything else. We have it now, yeah. She then made her way to Holland, had a brief singing career, and then made her way to England, where she met my dad, who'd actually been a fighter pilot in World War, in the war. He was in Poland. When the Air Force basically got shot out of the sky, they retreated through Hungary, Romania, all the way down. He made his way to North Africa, joined the French. When the French surrendered, they all got on boats and went to Britain because they wanted to obviously keep fighting Germans, as Poles often do, and basically joined the RAF. So he was in the RAF, and amazingly met my mum, you know, after the war in England. For some bizarre reason, she was in a hospital. He had walked into the hospital with a squirrel on his shoulder. Who would want a squirrel as a pet? I really don't know, but Dad did. So, you know, I was born. One of the lovely things is my wife Sandy, who's sitting here, we actually met at the Jagiellonian University on a summer course that we both attend in Poland. You know, we got married, and that's how I ended up in the United States. So I am an immigrant. But two things I just want to share. One is everything you said about parents not wanting to speak about the war, I think is completely true. I also know a lot of current American soldiers, both in Navy SEALs and also Special Forces, and they don't want to talk too much about this. So everything of that is true, which is the people who've really done things do not find it very comfortable to talk about these things. There's a great deal of coping mechanisms that people have. PTSD is a real thing, you know, from alcoholism to you name it. But one thing that I remember, I once flew in to see Mum in London, and she said, "Oh, I want to go and see a film." And I was like, you know, "Mum, really?" So it was The Pianist, and we went to see The Pianist.
Yeah,
And
I know.
she cried through the film. She said the music was so evocative. She relived so much of her time in Warsaw, and after the film, I took her out to an Indian for a curry, right? She developed a liking for curries for some reason as she got older. But that was one of the first times that she actually talked, and she shared so much about Warsaw. But she talked about łapki, you know, where there would be roundups, and literally they would block off the streets.
Yeah, łapanki.
Exactly, yes. So everything that I think you know, everybody has talked about, you know, ICE agents running around the streets. And really, just to mention it, everything going on in Ukraine, just the bombing, the killing, you know, and wherever else, it's just that all of that relives the memories that either obviously yourselves lived through, but also the stories that we, the children, have processed. So thank you very, very much for sharing all of that. It really meant a lot to, I think, all of us. So thank you.
And you're welcome.